Number 14, S-233, numéro 14, S-233.
On debate, Senator Deacon, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Your Honour. Colleagues, I'm rising to speak in support of the principle of Bill S-233 and ask the Senate to have the courage to vote in favour of studying this bill. So let me start by reminding us of the fact that, contrary to the vast majority of the 10,000 plus emails that we've been received on S-233, it's not about controlling people's lives or arbitrarily cutting off access to cherished government programs. On the contrary, Bill S-233 is designed to explore how we can better empower some of our society's most marginalized and vulnerable in a more effective and potentially more cost-efficient manner. I have two reasons why I think that study of Bill S-233 is so important. The first is the deeply troubling level of disinformation associated with this bill. Some groups are knowingly creating and sharing false information, and too many vulnerable Canadians are believing and sharing this false information. They're fearful that their access to various government programs will be arbitrarily cut off if Bill S-233 somehow becomes law. As our colleague Senator Simon said in a well-articulated Twitter thread, an unelected Senate cannot commit the government to spend any money. Studying this bill, let alone passing it, will not take away people's rights to existing social programs and does not initiate the World Economic Forum's takeover of our democracy. Rather, the bill proposes to look into how our social support programs and payments might be streamlined with the intention of improving delivery of such programs, particularly to vulnerable Canadians. I believe that the scourge of disinformation can only be countered with evidence and transparency, and that's something we can proudly say is reliably delivered through our Senate reports. The second reason I'd like us to study the Bill S-233 is that I'm increasingly worried about Canada's addiction to creating and never reducing regulatory burden. Particularly, we have a concerning affinity for command and control regulations, regulations that maintain the status quo, limit innovation, and too often create economically unsustainable programs. In business terms, we call this red tape. But too often we forget that it is not just businesses that have to deal with Canada's OECD leading levels of regulatory burden. It is all of us, and it is also our country's most vulnerable. So that is why I think it's important for us to study Bill S-233, to address the plague of disinformation head-on and to reduce regulatory burden and red tape. Interestingly, the desire to reduce regulatory complexities and red tape is what caused guaranteed annual income to be studied by a major policy conference for a national political party back in 1969. A fellow Nova Scotian tabled the idea of implementing a simple and effective guaranteed annual income and highlighted its promise of ending costly and inefficient rules-based income support programs that are weighed down by overlapping and often competing federal, provincial, and territorial authorities. So over 50 years ago, the principle of S-233 was being discussed and debated at a national policy conference. The focus was on replacing the inefficient status quo with an income tax-based minimum income that would be available to all Canadians if and when their income fell below a predefined level. So who was that Nova Scotian, and what was his political party? It was the Honourable Robert Stanfield, leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. And the reality is, the idea behind Bill S-233 is far from new, and might even represent one of the first times that Senator Pate has actually promoted Conservative Party policy. Actually, Senator Pate, I'm hoping that Senator Pett does not accuse you of plagiarism. More seriously, I want to see S-233 go to committee so that the Senate can explore, identify, and better understand innovative approaches to addressing pervasive poverty. I believe Robert Stanfield's vision of our inefficient status quo being replaced with a more efficient system of helping Canadians if and when their income falls below a predefined level is a very powerful one indeed. Perhaps unfairly, but prove me wrong, I believe that our income support to vulnerable and marginalized Canadians is fraught with inefficiency, limitations, and constraints that severely limit how effectively we enable these Canadians to access the support needed to create success in their lives. In addition, this support exists at the always complex intersection of federal, provincial, and municipal jurisdictional authorities and the oft-competing departmental authorities within each level of government. It's a recipe for program gaps, overlaps, and administrative burden. Now, I'd like to quickly describe 4 stories that have shaped my support for the study of Bill S-233 and have me believing in its promise. The first story is from my youth, retold to me more recently. The increasingly neglected plight of Ontario seniors in the early 1970s resulted in a bit of shenanigans at the powerful Treasury, Economics and Intergovernmental Affairs Committee of the Ontario Legislature. At the time, newspapers were telling stories of seniors whose only source of affordable protein was cat food, because 35% of them, over 65, in Ontario had incomes below the poverty line. My dad, who was an Ontario MPP at the time, found this to be reprehensible, as the vast majority were women, and they were the ones who had struggled through the Great Depression and then worked tirelessly to hold Canada's families, factories, and country together during World War II. Now, I had never heard about the shenanigans part of the story from my dad, but I did hear about it from retired Senator Hugh Segal about 3 years ago. At a TIGA committee meeting during the minority government, the majority of members voted to reduce the salaries of the minister and deputy minister of what would now be Ontario's Ministry of Finance to $1 per year. The purpose was to familiarize those gentlemen with the effects of poverty. Former Senator Segal was working with Premier Bill Davis at the time and suddenly had a very worried group of MPPs arriving at the door of his office. Hugh's response was to learn more. The result was that within 6 weeks, the Ontario Legislature unanimously passed a new guaranteed income supplement. What were the results? The supplement helped to reduce the poverty rate for those over 65 to under 5% of the population within 3 years. The second story I want to tell you is also discussed around our kitchen table when I was in my youth. It was Manitoba's Mincome program, which ran in Dauphin, Manitoba from 1974 to 79. The focus was to empower versus control those living in poverty. It became highly politicized and was shut down, with all the data collected being locked away in the Winnipeg Regional Office of Canada's National Archives and Library. What were the results? Well, 25 years later, a health economist by the name of Dr. Evelyn Forget rediscovered the project and was able to analyze the data. Dr. Forget's analysis illuminated some successes of the project. Dauphin's hospitalization rate for accidents, injuries, and mental health-related issues dropped by 8.5% for those who received basic income. School performance for children in the town improved, with a surge in enrollment rates for grade 12 students. But because Dr. Forget's analysis focused mainly on health outcomes of basic income, there was not sufficient data to assess the causal relationship between basic income and other social or economic outcomes. The third story that I want to tell you is also from the prairies. It's a powerful social innovation called Housing First, developed and refined in the courageous and caring prairie town of Medicine Hat. In 2015, Medicine Hat became the first community in Canada to end chronic homelessness, meaning that no more than 3 people were chronically homeless for more than 3 months. Housing First worked because it identified individual and structural risk factors of homelessness, such as chronic health issues, disabilities, addictions, and abuse, and centered programming on reducing these risks, as well as providing opportunities to build social relationships, earn adequate income, and gain access to affordable housing. What were the results? Between 2009 and 2014, the amount of time participants spent in jail reduced by 67%. The number of days spent in hospital reduced by 32%. But some questions remain. For instance, it's unknown what the total net cost savings of the Housing First initiative in Medicine Hat are over the period it has been active, which existing programs were eliminated, and others that may have been made redundant as a result of it. The last and fourth story I want to tell you is about a more recent experiment, the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project. It was commissioned as part of a larger poverty reduction strategy following recommendations from retired Senator Segal. When asking the government to consider implementing a pilot, Segal reflected on what a pilot should and shouldn't do. I'd like to quote him: "A pilot project must begin with an understanding of the costs of poverty, not only in present welfare and disability payments, but also in terms of added pressures on our healthcare system, on the economy as a whole, through the impacts on economic productivity and existing government revenues." Senator Pate reviewed the interim results of this program when she introduced S-233, so I will not repeat them, despite their merit. Suffice to say, I still find it very sad that former Senator Siegel's lifelong efforts to have a well-controlled study in GBI were cut short in Ontario in such an abrupt manner. In closing, for me, Bill S-233 is about reducing red tape for those who require society's support because they've not been able to get their feet under them, be it through their own choices or circumstances beyond their control. I've said too often, accessing support is highly complex and not unnecessarily restrictive. I hazard a guess that there likely aren't many of us who would have the patience to navigate the current system. Many like to think that's a good thing, I expect, because it's a deterrent. But I don't agree. Why? Because I believe it's possible for us to have a system that empowers versus controls those who need it most. For those who are already struggling to cope, why would we ever think that imposing administrative complexities would help them turn their lives around? I also believe that administrative burden is the enemy of productivity. Moreover, due to my Scottish heritage, choosing to maintain an inefficient and less effective system causes me to have an allergic reaction. Canada's moribund productivity growth continues to worsen because we do not innovate in everything we do. Canadians are hardworking, innovative, determined, but too many of our public services are constrained by a legacy of habit, not evidence of effectiveness. The OECD now predicts that Canada will have the worst performing economy through 2060. I'm not willing to lay this at the feet of any single political party or level of government. I believe it's due to a culture that is not committed to innovating in everything we do. We've got to stop tolerating the sentence, but that's not how we do it. Let's have the courage to innovate. Yes, innovation and change bring risk, but they also bring the evidence of what to do and what not to do. Colleagues, let's send Bill S-233 to committee and ask the committee to focus on how the federal government might work with one willing province or territory to complete a well-documented study of the principle underlying Bill S-233. Let's not just look at the costs, but at all the programs and services across all levels of government that might be replaced or eliminated, and the savings it might enable and the opportunities it might create. If we value the prosperity of our grandchildren, we must embrace change. We must embrace innovation. We must eliminate unnecessary rules and red tape and focus our attention firmly on the intended result. If not as it relates to supporting the most vulnerable in our society, then where? Thank you, colleagues.
Senatrice Bellemare, Senator Down, and then Senator Lankin, and we have 2 minutes left. So, Senatrice Bellemare.
Senator Bellemare. Thank you very much. Senator Bellemare. Senator Bellemare. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Would Senator Deacon take a question? Thank you. My question, Senator Deacon, is the following. I agree with you that it's very important to give people the means to become more independent, to empower people, in other words. But I wanted to know how much basic income we must guarantee to allow people to really lift themselves out of poverty with a guaranteed minimum income program. And in your opinion, which programs should be abolished, which lead to so much regulation? Thank you. That is my question.
Nova Scotia, sorry.
Thank you, Speaker. Senatrice Bellemare, those would be the questions I hope we would answer in committee as we looked at this program and see all the areas that it reaches into healthcare services, into paramedic services, certainly in my own community. The fire department recognizes that a great many of their calls relate to health crises and issues from those who are not getting appropriate health care. So who knows where we should limit this to? Who knows what programs could be delivered more effectively? But the patchwork, I think it's arguable, and certainly I would argue, provide the evidence to the contrary, it's arguable that a great many efficiencies can be gained, and so I'd look at that as being, to answer your question, being something that, that would come from a Senate study in this regard. Thank you.
Senator Deacon, we have two other senators that wish to ask questions. Are you asking for 5 more minutes?
If it's the wish of the chamber. Thank you, Speaker.
Is it agreed, honourable senators? Agreed. Senator Down.
Speaker, and thank Senator Deacon for asking for additional time. As you're aware, the 3 parties in the Prince Edward Island legislature, the Conservative Party, which is the government, the official opposition, which is the Green Party, and the Liberal Party, have all passed a motion asking the federal government to support a trial project in Prince Edward Island. This would be a continuation, really, of what was undertaken but stopped, as you indicated in your speech, in Ontario. The federal government so far has not agreed to do that because, as you know, there are 2 schools of thought. Prince Edward Island thinks it's a substantial replacement for existing programs and would target the very people you talked about in your remarks, where the other concern, of course, is the report done by the government of British Columbia indicating that the cost would be not sustainable over the long term. One of those views is obviously wrong. Would you agree with me that, like the child benefit, which has, in the case of Prince Edward Island, affected tremendous impact, over $500 million has come to Prince Edward Island in the last 4 years, tax-free benefits, affecting 25,000 families, 13,000 children impacted. A pilot project in PEI would work, in my view, as well. Would you share that view as well?
Deacon, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Senator Down, for the question. And I'd offer that if PEI gets to it first, that would be great. I totally believe that it's worthwhile doing, and that you've got an advantage on other provinces and territories and having that all-party support in your legislature. I'd love it to happen in Nova Scotia, but the point is I'd love it to happen because we don't know. We assume what the costs are. We don't know what programs and overlap can be eliminated. We don't know what opportunities can be created by empowering people and freeing them. I mean, there's examples from the past and from other countries where if there's a second income that comes into the house, then you're going to lose your benefits. Well, then you choose to push one parent out of the house, in effect. If they can't get jobs that employ them at a certain level, we've got to look at how our rules are creating opportunity and preventing opportunity. And that side of the equation, that opportunity creation side of the equation, we don't know about. And so that's why I'd love to see it go ahead in PEI, but I want to see it go ahead. And I want us to have a controlled study that really gives us an insight into all the different areas where impacts, negative and positive, will occur. And I may be proven wrong, but the evidence right now does not exist to say that helping people first will not create greater opportunity. And the evidence sure isn't there that our status quo is performing to the level it needs to.
Senator Lankin.
I'd be honored.
Thank you very much. And I can't tell you how much I agree with what you just said. And your answer to Senator Down, I thought, was right on. A lot of what we hear in pushing back against this idea, I think the pushback comes from a sense of intuition and not from any evidence. So the evidence that we've seen, whether it is pilot projects completed or partially completed, shows the opposite. But what we hear is things like the marginal effective tax rates will make it very difficult for us to determine where the clawback is or at what level to set the benefit. We hear that it would be a disincentive to work, and I think some of the evidence you alluded to disproves that. I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit in terms of what we do know from the evidence and why this is worthy of the next step of a national collaborative study with PEI.
Senator Deacon, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Senator Lankin. I can only speak from the personal experiences of times when my life has got really tough, and my ability to see opportunity and my willingness to take risks to step out of the circumstances that I've found myself in are it just closes in on you, and so I don't know how to quantify that at this point in time. But I believe that personally. I see that in people in my life where things just become overwhelming, and their ability to see what might be obvious to you and I as a next step just they just can't get there. They can't imagine that change. And I just look at in my own community where there have been people who have who've had the courage to create new opportunities. Invariably, there's been a little bit of a cushion underneath them that has allowed them to go and take a risk and maybe fail. But it's that controlled risk that I think is essential for us to make progress in every community and in every life and every family. And so I don't know how to quantify it. I've got, the examples I gave are, to me, that Housing First example for Medicine Hat I've just found so inspiring, because I can't imagine if I couldn't have a good night's sleep and a shower in the morning, how could I deal with any major issue in my life in a meal? Like, it's just telling people that they've got to do this and this and this before they get that key element. It puts them in an impossible position. So I don't have an answer, but that's why I think we need to do it. Thank you.
Senator Lankin, I'm sorry, the time has expired. Senator Martin. It is moved by the Honourable Senator Martin, seconded by the Honourable Senator Plett, that further debate be adjourned until the next sitting of the Senate. If you oppose adjourning debate, please say no. Carried.